With me in the studio, Janine di Giovanni, friend of the programme, seasoned war correspondent, award-winning author of 9 books, including The Morning They Came For Us, Dispatches from Syria. And she's also the CEO of the Reckoning Project, training journalists in documenting war crimes in Ukraine and the Middle East. Janine, thank you so much for being with us and your insight this week. Another eventful, surprising week.
Quite an extraordinary week between Ukraine, Gaza, the ceasefire being broken, terrible crimes happening there. President Trump never ceasing to amaze us on many different levels, the latest with El Salvador, trying to send anyone who destroys Teslas right to El Salvadorian prisons. Turkey, demonstrations in Serbia, Turkey. So it's been a pretty heavy week.
We're going to get through to some of those. A delight to have you. Janine, how do we measure progress made this week?
I think it's really important to consider what's at stake here, which is 19% of Ukraine. If Trump gets his way, that means basically we are going to normalize conquest. It means that foreign conquest, whether it was let's go back to Iraq and Kuwait or the Falklands, Argentina and the Falklands, if Russia is allowed to take this territory, and that's the way that peace happens, I think it's setting an incredibly dangerous precedent for international law and for future security. So in terms of the energy sector, the thing that strikes me is that under Ukrainian law, privatization of Zaporizhzhia can't happen. So, I mean, you just absolutely have to put that to one side. Now, talking to my team in Ukraine, and we have researchers, with the Reckoning Project, we have Ukrainian researchers who are on the ground investigating war crimes, Kremlin war crimes. As of today, there are 140,000 incidents that the Office of the Prosecutor General has issued. So we work largely on the deported children that have been taken to Russia. But what provisions will be made in this so-called peace accord, if it happens, for justice? That is going to be one of the most important things that comes out of it, if there is a peace deal. And we need to look at, and you and I have talked about this before, when wars end badly and you don't have justice instilled somehow in the end of wars, you will have more conflict, whether it will be in 5 years or 10 years. So Putin, it's not just Donetsk. We need to go back to Crimea with 2014, because if that is just handed over to him, you're going to have Ukrainians who will not accept that. They want territorial integrity. So I think this is something we really have to look at carefully. And then the future of Ukraine. Is it going to have EU membership, but not NATO? Where exactly will it stand with that? Because they've been waiting and they've been fighting a battle for us in Europe to hold back Putin for EU membership. So are we going to turn our backs on them?
There's 2 very important points you raise, and one that doesn't appear to have been in the phone call. The idea of 19,000 children is what Ukraine say, taken to Russia. And I know President Zelensky has said this got to be key part of the talks, that they've been separated from the family, they're being educated, brought up
they've been
as
adopted,
Russians.
and their language has been taken away, their names, when they arrive in Russia, their passports are taken away, they're given new Russian names, they're forced to speak Russian, young boys are going to be conscripted. And it's a big business in Russia to adopt kids. You could adopt 10, 12 kids. So, I mean, these kids have to come back. By the way, we use the figure 19,000. The Yale Conflict Observatory, who we've worked with, who are excellent, who've been shut down by President Trump this week, say up to 30,000 Ukrainian kids have been abducted, taken to Russia, and forcibly adopted. It's really, it's staggering. I don't think, if that was maybe optics for a documentary, or that's just a natural style of things, but maybe it tells us journalists are still
Was that real?
I've never seen anything like that
Me
before.
neither.
And all I could think of as well is his English has gotten so much better. Because when I started working in Ukraine, a few days after the full-scale invasion, he could barely understand English. And actually, during the terrible interview in the Oval Office with J.D. Vance and Trump, I kept thinking, well, the only redeeming factor here is Zelensky doesn't understand what they're saying, because they're being so insulting and he doesn't get it. But actually, that was great.
He does. Yeah. Okay. Which takes us. You wanted to come in.
Yeah, I have to say something. As someone who runs a war crimes unit in Ukraine and the parts of the Middle East, And as someone that has worked in Gaza since I'm 21 years old, from the first Intifada, I worked consistently in Gaza. What has happened with us watching, the international community allowing what has happened, has been probably the most shocking and distressing thing I've seen in my lifetime. And I've gone through 18 wars and 3 genocides. What we're doing is creating double standards of humanitarian assistance. There is one set of laws for Ukraine, and I work in Ukraine, and I'm very deeply loyal to what is happening there. But there is one thing that happens in Ukraine, and there's another thing that happens in Gaza. If a bomb falls on a hospital in Ukraine, Ursula von der Leyen says it's a war crime, and 6 people are killed. If many bombs fall in Gaza, and hundreds of people are killed overnight, well, that's Israel's right to defend themselves. How many thousand children? 13,000 children have been killed in Gaza. We barely focus on that. But when there's one family, and the Israeli hostage family that came back, the world suddenly is stunned and empathetic. What has happened to us as human beings if we allow this to happen on our watch? I don't know about you, but I can't sleep at night, and I can't live with myself knowing that we are allowing this to happen. We said never again after the Holocaust, and yet what we have right now is an absolute catastrophe, and beyond any kind of cruelty, Israeli policy has got to stop. And the international community has got to step in and do something for once without double standards.
Well, the International Court of Justice is still going through mounds and mounds of evidence. I think the Israeli government have until June to prepare their defence to South Africa's claims of genocide, and Israel maintains that this is not genocide, that they give notice. They say that they drop leaflets, they call people on their mobiles to get away. But we are seeing evidence backed up by the US that there are huge numbers of civilian casualties, as you say. Delal.
There are human rights organizations to forcefully displace men.
It is, if you want to go to international law and you want to look at genocide, and many people are reluctant to call it genocide, but the statements, Dalal is absolutely right. We don't need to do too much work because the Israeli government is doing it for us. Their statements
They're
show
outspoken
clear
about
intent.
their genocidal intent.
The definition of genocide is with the intent to wipe out an ethnic population. Now,
and they've said we want them to leave and not come back. And the images that the Israeli IDF soldiers take on their own cameras documenting their own war crimes, they're giving us plenty of evidence.
Janine, forget genocide. Even to say it's a breach of international humanitarian law, that was my point in that.
Give you 30 seconds. And I want to give you, Patrick, 30 seconds as well on this. Janine, your take.
Never, ever forget that J.D. Vance is a graduate of Yale Law. Yale Law is probably the greatest law school in the world, but what it's famous for is constitutional law. He knows how to fly around the Constitution. So what I am extremely worried about right now is how close Trump and his cronies will get to the law. I'm really worried about Mahmoud Khalil, who was taken away, who has a green card, whose wife is American, the NYU student, anyone who was facially recognized for standing up for Palestine at peaceful protests. People being arrested at the border now, people who, if you go to America, I'd be careful
without
if you don't
any
have an American,
hearing or
they can get into our phones. They can do all kinds of things that the ACLU is saying now. There are many laws that are being manipulated. Trump is flying very close to the Constitution.
Patrick.